if I don't say that. All right. This session is being recorded, of course, like all the ones that we do on Wednesdays will be. Excuse me. And I will post this recording later on Blackboard in that recorded lectures section, which is right below, I think, the collaborate link. Before I get started, I got to, in terms of lecture material, I do want to talk about some basic things about being online and doing the class, but does anybody have any questions for me before I actually get into that? Anything we talked about, and this is something you'll hear me say the first couple of weeks or so, probably to ad nauseum, is anybody having troubles with Blackboard, with mastering, with getting those assignments to load? Don't wait till the last minute. Don't even wait till the last week. You should have already been online. I'm not saying you have to have done the assignments, but make sure that everything's linking properly. Okay. Now, of course, you can speak to me during this session. The only thing that I ask is you would leave your microphones on mute, because then background noise, it's a little different than being in class. Sometimes background noise will get transmitted over and kind of distract all of us. If you've ever been on conference calls, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Speaking of background noise, I do have 3 dogs that live with me, so occasionally they go crazy and start barking. At that time, I'll mute the mic for a second and go settle them down, then I'll come back. I'll tell you, I won't just run off. Some of you noticed before class started that you can actually write on the whiteboard. Yeah, you have that, what is it called? Accessibility or permission, they call here in Collaborate, to do that. I don't mind at all. I mean, I don't really want you, doodling on it while I'm trying to do class. Here I'm lecturing, you guys are, what is that right there? There we go. You guys are doing that, so don't do that if you will. But if you want to say something to me, or not actually say, if you want to say something, you can say it to me, or you can type it to me. But if I'm like, where on the slide are you talking about? You're more than welcome to go. I'm talking about, come on. Yeah, right there. Right? Occasionally, I'm hoping they worked on this, and I'm hoping they fixed, but over the summer, this is the second time I've used this version of Collaborating. We all know about computers. When a new version comes out, just because the number is higher doesn't mean it's better, right? So over the summer, I noticed that there was occasional times in which I would disconnect. I know when I'm disconnected, but I found that I could. Yeah, that's all right, Barbara. I figured that your name wasn't Barbara Bagia. But if that happens, if I do disconnect, I usually can reconnect very quickly. Just stick with me. I'll be right back online. If it takes a little while longer, which I think I only had one real sort of problem like that last summer, just be patient with me. If it seems to be going on, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to fire you off an email through Blackboard and say, hey guys, something's messed up, truck just ran into the Bright House node down the road or something like that. And what I would do in that case is I'm not going to hold, that's not your fault, obviously. I will record the lecture as soon as I can, as soon as I get back up online. Obviously without you guys, and then I'll post it later, so you won't miss the information. It'll just be a little less friendly, I suppose. I'm going through a checklist here. We're doing lab 1. We're doing lab 1 next week, right? Yeah, we're doing lab 1, so make sure you print, which means whatever I said in class. Bring to, I guess is the best way to say it. Bring the lab 1, and closed-toed shoes too. Don't forget those. And of course, reasonable attire. Don't get something. Of course, we're not going to be working with any fire or anything. I told you about office hours already. If you come in during class, and I usually try to greet everybody and say hello, just like I would normally. But if for some reason I seem to miss you, the problem has to do with I can't look at 2 screens on this at the same time. I can't look at the chat part and then the part that tells me who's in the class. So don't feel bad. I will always, excuse me. I will always click back over on the chat part or the participation list so I can make sure I record your attendance here. I think that's all I want to say when it comes to that. I'm sorry I'm having maybe going through puberty all over again. My voice seems to be cracking a little bit, but all right. Any other questions? Anything we need to talk about? Any problems with Blackboard or anything like that I've been mentioning? Any problems with what we talked about in class? Any problems with any of the policies we discussed? Everybody's, feeling Okay with that? All right. I don't know exactly how the lag is going, so if sometimes you type a question into chat and it seems like I'm avoiding the question, I'm not. It may take a little bit for it to pop up, or what I'm doing is trying to figure out how to answer it. All right, and I may either sometimes I do that by typing something in, or by by saying it, or sometimes both. I try to do both. I don't do a lot of scribbling on the screen other than pointing to things and trying to help with illustrations. Yeah, hold on a second. Okay, I'll be happy to. Um, but I generally don't try to write on the screen. For one thing, my penmanship is awful anyway, and writing on the screen it's tilted with this pen, so I try to type it. But if I do write something and it's just mess, then let me know. Taylor, go to what course information? Like where you clicked on collaborate, go up. It says course information. Scroll all the way down, and then there's a white box that says lab manual, something or other, and then a link to a PDF. Okay. All right. Okay, so I mean, this easy question, right? Or maybe not so easy question that we've been going over. I mean, I think it's easy in the sense that we're alive. So if someone says, what's it like to be alive? Well, I don't know. I am, right? It's not something you can actually put into words. It's something that poets and musicians and artists all talk about and create in different ways. But what we're trying to do here, obviously, is science, okay? And science is not cold, right? I know some people think, oh, scientists tend to be so cold or so pragmatic. Some of them are, and just like in every walk of life. But I think many times scientists, I like to think a lot of scientists anyway, kind of look at it as this sense of wonder, this idea of like, wow, it's actually better to not completely have the answer as far as I'm concerned. It's actually better to look out into the universe and never really know everything about it as far as I'm concerned, because that's the whole idea of coming across the pond, coming across the Atlantic, the European explorers and any other explorers out there. So I don't like to think of science as cold. I like to think of science as a sense of holy cow, like a kid, right? I'm getting excited about stuff. Like if we see a single cell organism, and one of the first folks to look under a microscope was a guy named Anton von Leeuwenhoek. Don't worry, you'll see his name later. He was von Leeuwenhoek, was that Dutch, I think, right? And back then, microscopes you had to like make them, or you had to get somebody to make them, and so the quality anyway. So when microscope quality got to this sufficient level, Anton von Leeuwenhoek looked at a drop of pond water. We talked about Bio 2 or Bio 1, but we talked about that first time you looked at a drop of pond water. That was Bio 2. And you went, at least for me, I don't know, seventh grade or whatever, I was like, whoa, what is all this stuff swimming around in there? I mean, I knew there was stuff in there, but just to see it and watch it, and then watch the paramecium eat things, and the cilia on the stentor, and all these really cool things that maybe you remember or not, and then maybe watch like a hydra, which is not a protozoa, it's actually an animal, but budding, or watching cells divide, like yeast cells. You can watch yeast cells divide. Like, wow, what is that all about? The human mind working, holy cow, there's some people who spend their entire life doing that, right? So we've already gone over this slide, but in the end, the part at the bottom is probably my best point here. There's no simple definition to that, right? There's no simple definition because human beings are complex individuals. Each and every one of us is complex, and we see the world a little bit differently. That's part of the greatness of all this. Is part of the fun of the wonderment of saying, we're not all the same thing. That's I get accused by some students, not accused, that's not the right word, of always trying to recruit females into STEM, science, technology, education, and math types of courses. I always say, the more females that I get into STEM professions or STEM careers, I get a toaster oven. That's obviously a joke, but everybody thinks a little different, and there is something to this Mars and Venus, if you remember all that stuff, and it's not really a conflicting kind of thing. It's sort of a beneficial. I worked with some really interesting female scientists, and I'm just again, male, female, generalized terms. I know personalities vary across the way. Have very unique insights into things that I think a lot of males, at least the ones I knew, didn't really think about it that way. So I do need toaster ovens. So all right, so obviously alive is alive is alive. Yeah, those are nice squares. You could do that too. So all right, let's go on to the next one here. Blah. We talked about the fact that living things are put together in a certain way. I showed you the chambered nautilus, and I said, if your cat, and this is one of those, don't try this at home. Your cat has all these body parts, spleen and stomach and brain. But if you went home and you You dissected your cat, right? Excuse me. Anyway, maybe you found the cat dead, and you dissected him, and you put it into a bucket. I guess you'd have to find the cat alive for my analogy to work, but it wouldn't be life. It has all the parts, but it's not arranged, right? Among other things, the things aren't in the right parts, so they're not in the right area. Reminds me of a comparative vertebrate anatomy professor I had in college. And comparative vertebrate anatomy is just what it sounds like. What we do is we look at how is a cat different than what else was one of those weasel, and how is that different than other types of organisms. So we dissected a lot of different things, and if you think about it, when you're looking at that, what he would do is the parts are all in the same basic spot, right? But he never he knew that comparative vertebrate anatomy, we'd get the idea. Everybody's spleen is about in the same place, everybody's stomach, everybody's brain. We talked about that the other day. So what he would do with the visceral organs of these organisms, the internal organs during lab practicals, is he would throw them into a bucket. He just, I'm not trying, I know it's first thing in the morning, but he would put all that stuff into it, and you couldn't say, oh, I know that's the spleen, because that's where the spleen is. You had to know the spleen by what it looked like, right? So you get the idea. So right there, he was upsetting our idea of order, obviously. But living things have order, and order comes at a cost, and it's metabolism, and that's because everything's falling apart. It's a kind of a general rule of thumb that they say that the entropy in your body, so the seesaw goes more toward the entropy side after about the age of, 27? I know it seems weird, right? It's a long downhill slide to the 75 or 80 years. But I guess the idea is if you're balancing it out, that about 27, the teeter-totter starts going towards towards the falling apart side. And metabolism helps slow that down, but it doesn't stop it. And that's why that sentence there, right, mitigates. That mitigates doesn't mean to stop. It means to compromise, I guess. But in the end, we always lose, right? Homeostasis, or this balance, is teeter-tottering. You get hot, you sweat. You're cold, you shiver, blah, 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 everything we talked about. The purpose behind that is to slow down entropy. And then if you lose the ability to maintain balance, then say you overeat, okay? Or, sorry, not overeat, but you overheat. Almost the same word. Well, the doorbell just went, so hopefully, all right. It's being good so far. All right. Anyway, so you understand what I mean by that, right? My metabolism and homeostasis and how that's all linked together, and that these characteristics of life, these first two that we're talking about, organization and metabolism, they're related, right? Life isn't a single sentence. It's not just order, because as we talked the other day, rocks have order, and it's not just metabolism, because when we look at metabolism a little bit later on in like enzymes and photosynthesis, that's just chemical reactions, folks. That's all that is. We are nothing more, in terms of looking at it from that level, we are nothing more than chemical reactions. Everything that goes on your body is A plus B yields C, or plus D, or whatever. All that stuff that maybe you remember from chemistry, okay? Life beyond all of that is a lot richer, of course. We talked the other day about I'm sure that Cooper loves me. All right, my dog, by the way. Everything grows and it develops, even the plants and the animals and the bacteria and all this. Oh gosh, however millions of species there are on Earth, I'm sure it's something we can never know. And if you're a koala, that's good because you're really adapted, right? Adaptation is dealing with evolution, organisms becoming efficient in their environment. Right? Organisms, the purpose of evolution by adaptation is not to make perfect organisms. You can't, because the environment's always changing. Florida 10,000 years ago was basically underwater. There was, it's just the way it is. That's the ebb and flow of the environment. And organisms like koala bears, eating eucalyptus, do a really good job of digesting eucalyptus. They're probably, very high efficiency rates. But unfortunately, we talked about if all the eucalyptus go extinct, and it takes the koalas with them. Rabbits with their big ears can not only hear you, sounds like I'm starting a poem, but they can also be used to regulate body temperature. See the ears? See how now, here's something interesting. Analytical thinking. Look at this rabbit here. And I've already thinking I've given it away because we've talked about this enough. But that picture of that rabbit, is that rabbit in air temperature that's cold or warm? Or in between? Well, no. Why? I mean, that's right, but what clues you to that? Yours help it cool off, and the blood vessels, specifically barbovagia. What about? I'm gonna call you that for the rest of the semester. What specifically about the blood vessels? There you go. There you go. So you don't have to. Don't be afraid. Like you say, oh, what is that word called? Maybe I said in class. The blood vessels, excuse me, they dilate, like your pupils dilate. Don't worry about it. I'm not worried about you knowing the word. That's perfect. Yeah, they expand. There's more blood, and blood is fluid, like the radiator fluid in your car, right? Same thing. So I use a lot of analogies in class. I use a lot of analogies because, at least for me, that's one of the ways I learn. So I look at that and I go, oh, it looks like a radiator. And I know what a radiator in a car does. So, you know, anyway, all right. The purpose behind evolution by adaptation is to make those organisms uniquely efficient in the environment right now today. You can't make a perfect critter. And the goal of evolution by adaptation is only to be good enough right now. And you just have to be a little bit better, because what's going on amongst critters of the same species and critters of different species and widely different organisms is competition. Everybody trying to survive, okay? And remember, we talked in class that evolution is when a genome. What was a genome? What was a genome the other day? Give me a nice little definition. What did I call that? Or what did I say that was? Yep. And specifically, of course, it's the collective. So you have a genome, and Logan has a genome, and Robin, everybody's got a genome, and Amber and I've got a genome, and then us humans, we all got a genome in the classroom the other day, and then all of us in, say, that live in Florida. You see what I mean? And the reason why we can say that that's a collective set of information is we're not saying they're exact, but the idea is where, especially among critters, maybe not so much among humans, but among critters, where you live is kind of probably who you breed with. How far do you think this seahorse in this picture goes to find a mate? Do you think there are big herds of, yeah, that's right, are perfect. Do you think there are big herds of seahorses, horses going across the ocean? We live in Japan, but the only place I can find a mate is in Mexico. Do you think that this little tiny seahorse does that? Of course not. Of course not. It stays around the area where it is. So that means that they're all sharing genetic information. Okay, that's the idea of a genome. And of course, how big or small a genome is what you define. You have a genome, we have a genome, right? Okay, got that part. Yeah, excellent. So these organisms here, during evolutionary adaptation, during evolution, excuse me, strike the adaptation, their genomes are changing, right? But I said that maybe isn't always for the better. Like I mentioned, and again, maybe I didn't. I'm trying to remember. I didn't buy it too, but I'll mention it here. Cheetahs, the African cat. Everybody knows a cheetah. The ones that run 80 miles an hour. I saw a guy at a talk one time. He had placed a critter cam. There's like before there was GoPro, but it was a collar on a cheetah, and there was a camera right below the cheetah's jaw. And then the cheetah would go out and about. You could see a cheetah walking around. But when it was chasing stuff and it was going after prey, think about a GoPro doing about 70, 80 miles an hour, I don't know, maybe 2 feet off the ground. I mean, it's incredible. And you see, boom, boom, jump back and forth and going after the whatever it was chasing, the impala or something like that. And then, of course, what was the record? I think they said, the guy was saying that like 80% of all cheetah attacks, like going after prey, are unsuccessful. So the ones you see on TV, they're, oh, poor. And remember that 80% of the time that critter gets away, if that makes you feel any better. I know animals eat each other. I don't care to particularly watch it or see it, but it was really kind of awesome to see. But cheetahs went through this thing called a bottleneck many years ago, and thousands of years ago, actually a couple of times, and their genome shrank. And what we mean by bottleneck is just what you think about, that the population got funneled through, like got decreased very quickly. Went from several thousand cheetahs to, just a few thousand cheetahs. And so that means that genome shrank. And that's really bad because while that's evolutionary a change, that's change in a genome, it got less variable because fewer critters were left behind. I mean, think how much variability there are in 3 humans versus 3 million humans. Yeah. So as that population bottleneck, we lost genomic information. We lost variability. And if you take my bio 2, you'll hear variability a million times. Variability is the key to organisms adapting. But anyway, evolutionary change in that case is not adaptive, though. It's maladaptive because the cheetahs actually had less variability. If what that less variability is bad for is if everybody's the same, if everybody has the same genetic information, like we're clones, and cheetahs in Africa for all intents and purposes are clones of one another. They're almost genetically identical. If some disease comes along that kills cheetahs, they're probably all going to die, right? See, I don't remember measles. Do kids even have the measles anymore? I don't know. But when we were kids, we would get the measles, and oftentimes that happened before you started school, before you started like first grade. So it was very common, kind of barbaric, I think, but for mothers to bring their children around each other to give them the measles so they would be immune before they started school. My mother did it to me. The Hawes, I don't know why I would remember their name, lived next door to us, 5 boys. Michael Hawes was my friend, and then he had 4 brothers. They all got the measles. I got the measles from them. My mother, of course, made sure that we played together. And Michael, my friend, never got the measles. Never. Now, the reason why he never got the measles, of course, is I'm sure you guys know he was immune. How was he immune? He was born immune. It just kind of, if you want to say luck of the draw, it's kind of that way. Now imagine that instead of the measles, that's the bubonic plague. The bubonic plague killed 1/3 of Europe. It killed 1 in 3 people. There are historical accounts of censors, people going around counting folks, census folks, going into villages that everybody in the village is dead. 200 people, 1,200 people, 1,000 people, everybody's dead. But every once in a while they go into a village and 1 or 2 of them still be alive. Now, come on, they had to have been exposed to it. So, in that particular case, we have an evolutionary adaptation that actually is beneficial, right? That's how that works. That's what we mean by adapting. You becoming uniquely efficient in your environment. You can fight off disease, unless you're the koala where you kind of carry it too far. So you get it? Evolution means genetic change, not necessarily for the better. Evolutionary change through adaptation is when organisms change to become more efficient. It's natural selection. It's what Darwin talked about. Okay. So Darwin goes around the world, and the reason why this is significant is because no matter where he went, he was witnessing adaptation. He said, "Wow, look at it's funny to me sometimes. Scientists would go, "Wow, look how efficiently that bird flies." Well, no kidding. It's got wings. But I mean, if you think deeper than that, that is an interesting question. What about a fish, a bird, a snake? Not to slight the plants, a pine, an oak. What about those critters, allows them to be efficient in their environment? So if it's a rabbit and it's got long hair, because it probably lives in cold climates. And you guys were talking about the rabbit with the ears, right? Same idea. A rabbit that wouldn't be able to have, a rabbit with smaller ears wouldn't do as well in that hot climate, would it? Why wouldn't it? Why wouldn't a rabbit with smaller ears than the one we saw in the picture not do very well in that climate versus that rabbit with longer ears? What's about the size of the ear and the climate? There you go. It's like having a small radiator, right, on a really big vehicle. Like taking the radiator off of a Mini Cooper and putting it on an F-150. Yeah, that's not gonna cool it down very well. And that's what I like this chart because this is that whole concept map kind of thing that I was talking about. So we got a group of critters at the top, a population. A population has a definition, folks. It's a member of, it's conspecifics, I'm typing this, members of the same species, okay, who have the potential to interbreed. Not inbreed. Inbreed bad. Inbreed is what the cheetahs are doing. They don't mean to. But inbreeding is lack of genetic information because you're breeding with people with organisms closely related to you. Okay, so that's a population. So the real significant part about this whole chart too is the fact that we're saying that an organism, an individual does not evolve. A population evolves. Okay, a group of individuals, because you have to have variation. One has no variation. You have no variation. You are you. You and your brother, sister, mother, father, and you and I, we all vary from each other, right? Okay, so you got hereditary variation. You got the idea that most critters are going to die. Estimates of sea turtle mortality, sea turtle egg mortality is for every 1,000 eggs that are laid. Female lays about 100 eggs per nest, varying on species. But only one of those eggs hatches, and does that organism live long enough to survive and reproduce itself? I think I mentioned this in class. Sometimes I get confused which class I say it in because of where we are. And we went into 105 the other day, didn't we? That's why. Anyway, I'm sorry if I repeat, but what the heck, it's good info. You guys were very correct on the temperature with the rabbit. You understood very well the fact that the only thing that's going to cause these critters to even evolve through adaptation, through evolutionary adaptation, right, is the environment. If everything stays the same, if the environment never gets cools or warms or wetter or drier or whatever the case may be, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Don't change the size of your ears if you don't need to. Don't grow more hair if you don't need to. Okay, but it isn't that way. Mother Nature has this really nasty sense of humor that as soon as organisms become adapted, you might want to say perfect, right? Mother Nature says, "Oh, new deck of cards." Ba, ba, ba. Remember how it was really wet and dry for a while there, dinosaurs, and you were kicking butt? Well, now it's going to be a lot, or I'm sorry, hot and dry. Now it's going to be a lot wetter and cooler. And reptiles don't do well in wet, cool climates, right? So bye-bye dinosaurs. Anyway, but as the environment changes, Michael Hawes, I wonder if he thinks, I wonder if he knows, I wonder if he's still alive even, but I wonder if he knows that I mentioned his name. I mean, I was like 5, so anyway. So that means that somebody in the population that's interacting with the environment has an advantage, right? They live longer. That's the advantage. Maybe they run faster so they don't get eaten. Maybe they run faster so they eat more. Maybe they cool quicker. Maybe they're better at finding a nesting site if that's important. Oh my goodness. Maybe they process a particular food type better than some. Whatever. You don't have to be perfect. Just have to have the edge. Just have to have a little bit of an edge based on the environment, which of course changes, of course. So that means some of you breed more than others, and the ones that breed more leave behind more offsprings, and the ones that breed less leave behind less offspring. Do the math, right? If an organism, okay, I'm going to type this out. Organism A. Organism A produces 100 offspring per year, lives 10 years. Organism B produced, let's say 200 offspring per year for 5 years. Who's going to leave behind more offspring? So organism A, 100 per year for 10 years. B, 200 a year. Look at it again, Amber. Yeah, right? So which organism there has the advantage? And what I mean by advantage is go back to the chart here. Which organism here, differences in reproductive success? Which organism here leaves behind more offspring? A or B? Yep. Sorry, I thought somebody typed it in there. Okay, but over their lifetime. Yeah, that's a very good point, Ara. Absolutely. But over their lifetime, who's going to leave behind more offspring? It's not, well, it's not a trick question, but think about it, right? If they leave the same number, that means, yeah, that's right. So neither one of those has an advantage over the other. Now let's go organism A produces 100 per year but lives 15 years. Now, you don't have to do the math again right away. You know that obviously organism A leaves behind more offspring. So now who has the advantage? A, right? Because what we mean by advantage, simple, write it in your notes. In evolutionary adaptation, gotta make sure we're talking about that. The advantage means you leave behind more offspring. Now, nobody knows how many of those are going to survive. Maybe 1 in 1,000, like the turtles. But as long as you leave more than the other one and the mortality rate is the same, then, if every turtle out there loses 1 in 1,000, but you lay 2,000 versus the other turtle that lays 1,000, do the math. Okay? So in the end, that's what happens. In the end, that's what happens, right? All of this evolutionary by adaptation thing that Darwin talked about, all the stuff that that we sometimes argue about and talk about, it's very, very, very simple. It's all about things differ, and because they differ, and because the environment causes you to have to be efficient, you can't have little ears in a warm environment. Because of that, some of you get an advantage. Some of you bacteria, some of you fungi, blah, 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 all the critters out there. And that means that through time, individuals don't evolve. You're born the way you are. Like my father used to say, you always dance with the one what brought you, right? If you know what that means, great. If you don't, that means you can't change who you are. Through time, though, the population can change. And if they change for the better, and they would change for the better, they would have to, because the only reason you would have a better reproductive success is because you're genetically, let's not say stronger. I don't really like the way that, connotation, but genetically more adapt. Your genetic information, Michael Hawes, allows you to survive the measles. Had it been the plague, you'd have been the one guy in the village they found alive. Any questions on that? It's really very simple. So use this chart, kind of organize your thoughts. All right. We're cool? Everybody good? Did I bore everybody to sleep? I hope not, because I love this stuff. Sweet. Let's go on. Living things respond, right? I mean, they have to. You come into class next week and I hit you with a hammer, you're going to respond, right? The Venus flytrap, we talked about the little hairs on there. That's very cool. It responds. And of course, the dragonfly, he or she is probably trying to get out. You want to hear a cool thing about dragonflies? Dragonflies today are almost exactly the same as dragonflies during the dinosaurs. They are a prehistoric, well, not prehistoric, but they are a dinosaur era critter that hasn't changed much. Wow, the environment certainly changed since the dinosaurs, but these organisms live in many different environments. And somewhere there's an environment, in some types of environment in which they can survive. And then, of course, from that, yeah, they sure do. Even the midges do, the little juvenile larvae do too. Okay, so response to an environment, internal, external. Yeah, you get hungry, you eat. Bear chases you, run. Emotional, only humans for sure. Not that I don't think animals have emotions. All of us living things. I always tell my bio-2 students, can you imagine? And there are some theories out there that said this exactly happened. Life on Earth began about 3.5 billion years ago. Okay, we talked about that. The Earth was around about 1 billion years, but the conditions got to the point where life could survive about 3.5 billion years ago. So, it was very rough, single-celled organisms, and just kind of holding on, making a living on the edge, that kind of stuff. And then luckily the environment and heredity and all the stuff we've been talking about worked our way, and boom, 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 the branch grows, and here we are today, 3.5 billion years. But there's a lot of theories out there that suggest that life, as we define it, except for this one characteristic that we're getting ready to talk about, life may have begun more than once on Earth. Maybe living, maybe organized things that could metabolize, that could, well, they couldn't evolve either. That's right. That could respond. Maybe those things actually arose on Earth. Came out through chemical methods, things we call biogenesis, which If that's interesting to you, that's something I talk about more in bio too. But what if they lack the ability to reproduce? Can you imagine? That means everything, boop, and then gone. It's like, oh, you missed a really important part because living things perpetuate. Life, it's all about species perpetuation. The reason why a 17-year-old boy thinks about it every 20 seconds, species perpetuation. The reason why you get maternal instincts is species perpetuation. We're a slave to this reproduction. And the reason being is it's kind of like Mother Nature says, listen, if I'm going to go through all this effort to make this really super duper complex machine, this living thing, what's the sense of doing it once? Let's give it the ability to make offspring, like this little giraffe looking out behind its mom. Isn't that cool? Neat. Or us, right? Not the bear, obviously. Or these monkeys. These monkeys. Ooh, you think 17-year-old boys think about like these are those bonobo monkeys, and basically they just kind of reproduce. To them, what was I reading? It's a method of breeding, sexual activity, whatever. All right, monkey. Flowers do it too. This is the male part of the flower where everybody look at that yellow stuff. That's the stuff you sneeze at, right? If you're allergic. And then this is actually where the female part is going to be. The female part's down here. This is sticky and the pollen sticks to it. If you're something like E. coli, that's not so bad, Steve. E. coli, right? We hear about it. Chipotle. Sorry if you work for Chipotle's, but Chipotle had an outbreak of it. E stands for its real scientific name, Escherichia. So it's Escherichia coli. But they divide, very simple. You can divide sexually, that's the way we do, and that sexually is basically two individuals, or you can divide asexually, which is basically one individual. So in this case, what's happening with that E. coli bacteria is they're undergoing something called binary fission, splitting in two. Now, there's a difference in genetic variability. That's the real difference between those two. If you're E. coli and you're splitting in two, you're making clones, so there's a lot less genetic variability. There is some, but a lot less. The reason why there's some is because every time DNA gets copied, the genetic material doesn't always get copied the same way. I'll talk more about that later on in the semester. Killer whales reproduce and they nurse. This is a young calf when I worked at SeaWorld. Took a picture of, well, I didn't take the picture, the photographer did, of the young calf nursing on the female. The mammaries are back towards the fluke. This is actually her genital slit right here. So there are mammaries on either side. And the baby actually comes up underneath her and bumps his head on her mammaries for either one of two reasons: to either stimulate milk let down, so milk into the part of the mammary gland where the baby can withdraw it, or to judge which side is full. But sometimes we notice the females get a little irritated, like, enough. You can probably imagine. Now, anyways, and the reason why we reproduce, I mentioned to you, is because of this molecule right here. Name it. You don't have to, it's the letters. Give me the letters. 3 letters. I don't expect you to remember the first one. Oh, I'm sorry, Isabel. I'm sorry. I love their tacos, though. All right. And what is DNA? I mean, to be fair, also the was I don't want to say a brand now. You got me paranoid there. But lettuce had E. coli on it. Spinach a few years ago had E. coli on it, right? So it has, I mean, it's actually because Chipotle was trying to, their source was trying to be all local grown, right? Isn't that right, Isabel? So that means they're trying to be very fresh, and unfortunately, it happens. It happens. What was I reading one time that said the number of times per year that you get food poisoning and don't think, you kind of go, oh, that whatever didn't agree with me, and you don't think of it as food poisoning. But I guess the bottom line is we suffer a lot more minor bouts of food poisoning per year than we think. That's interesting. That means that our body obviously has a way to survive through that, a lot of that stuff, right? Unless you get a really severe case. So anyway, back to my question, Carrie Ann, Logan, Marie, anybody out there. What is DNA? It's a molecule. It's got these letters in it. Yeah, it's our genetic makeup, right? It's our genetic makeup. These letters, which we'll talk about a couple of chapters from now, these letters actually are a code, aren't they? even if you don't know what A and T and G and C mean, you can see that if you arrange them differently, A, G, T, A, C, G, A, right, you get differences. And if we go and we blow the bubble up really, really big, we say little tiny differences in this code results in, because this is what your genes are made of, yeah, you know, not your jeans you wear, but the genes, right? This is what your genes are made of. So if little tiny differences in the code, you'll differences in the genes, and differences in the genes, differences in the individuals, and differences in the individuals. Right there, right? Yep, even mutations. Mutations are going to be a really good source of genetic variation if you're a quick reproducer. Good question, Ari. Yeah, the asexual reproducers out there, again, back to our buddy there, the E. coli, they reproduce a lot very quickly. So even though mutations may happen, the figure is on Earth each day, human beings, just human beings, all the human beings on Earth, spontaneously produce genetic mutations about 65,000 times. So throughout Earth, in one day, if we looked at all the humans, there's been created spontaneously, because, as I said and mentioned a second ago, when DNA copies, when cells reproduce, you have to make copies of the DNA. Nothing's ever perfect, of course. But 65,000 mutations among humans. If you were to look at like the number of E. coli that are produced in a day, or any other binary splitting thingamabob out there, critter, then you can add up and see that that's going to make a lot more, right? So even if it's only 1 in a bazillion, which is not a number, but if you make a bazillion a day, right? It's all numbers. Oh boy. Okay, so DNA, genetic code, that's obviously important for life. We'll talk more about the structure of this molecule later on, so don't worry about any of that. Let's look at how life is organized. This is kind of neat because this is sort of that superposition of humans and the way life is, and it's this kind of perception thing again. I'd like to start smaller though, so come down here to number 10. Now, somebody pointing on the screen. I thought it was me. That's okay if you are. It was just kind of freaking me out there. Actually, there are things that make up molecules that we know as atoms, and then there are things that make up those. But whew, it's in a chemistry class. But let's make our way from small to large. So first we start with molecules and things that's like water and carbon dioxide and all that sort of stuff. And in things that we're going to talk about a little bit later on, known as cells, which I bet you guys have heard of, there are parts of cells, and those are things called organelles. Now, if that word looks like organ, doesn't it? Yeah. So organs in humans, stomach, brain, organelles in cells. Think of it as mini organelles. These little mini organelles that do all kinds of different things that we'll learn about when we talk about cells make up those cells, and cells make up tissues. And tissues, just as a side there for a second, are very important among animals. As a matter of fact, this is a bit misleading because technically, scientists say that really only animals exhibit what we consider the quality of a tissue. And a tissue is a group of cells that work together. They work cooperatively, which is kind of a vague definition. But if that's interesting to you and how single cells became tissues, which is very interesting when you think about the evolution of life on Earth, that's something we do talk about in Bio 2 a little more as well. Then again, tissues make up organs, stomach, organ systems, digestive, which make up organisms, groups of organisms of the same species. What's that word again? If we're all the same species. We're all members of the same species. We breed together. I said it a second ago. We have the potential to breed with one another. There you go. Yeah, populations, right? So populations of members of the same species who have the potential. So just to touch on that one more time before we leave it, if we could define two populations of eastern gray squirrels, in the area where we live here. Eastern gray squirrels are found throughout the East Coast, hence the reason eastern gray squirrels. But we could say that the eastern gray squirrels that hang around the Leesburg campus are one population, and the eastern gray squirrels that hang around the campus, say down around the University of Miami, are another population. Now think about that for a second and then answer me this question. Why can I call those two most likely, probably separate populations? This question is to help you remember what a population is. It's a group of the members of the same species, but it's something that that you touched on, Aura, a couple of seconds ago. Yeah, there you go. That's exactly right. The ones around Miami have a different genome. They have and the reason why, and I said probably or most likely, what are the odds that a Miami squirrel makes its way up to Leesburg campus to mate with somebody, just like we're talking about with the seahorse, right? That's a little, that's a little long way for a squirrel to make the hike. Now, is that impossible? No, a squirrel could jump on a truck in Miami and make its way up there and be delivered in Leesburg, but that's one squirrel. That's not, it's like a mass migration of Miami squirrels coming up here or something like that, right? Make sense? Now, in the world, everything lives together. So when we talk about communities, we basically are talking about all the living things. There's a cool word for that. It's known as communities are all the biotic components. Biotic components, all the living things, the animals, the plants, the fungus, the different types of bacteria, all those kinds of critters. Okay. Now, back to our discussion about evolution, remember that we understood that evolutionary adaptation, evolutionary change to adaptation, only occurs because the environment changes. Okay? That if the environment doesn't change, if it ain't broke, remember that? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah. So in the next level, where we go ecosystem, we do a little math here. We take the biotic, right, the living things, and we factor in the fact that the biotic interact with the abiotic. Oops. What's the capitals? Abiotic. Okay. In science, when you put an A in front of a word, it oftentimes means the opposite. Okay. So biotic means the living parts of an area, and abiotic means the non-living parts. And the reason why it's important that we understand those things are together is because of the fact that they are together, right? You can't have the biotic components, the members of the communities, level 3, interact with the stuff in the 2. Fish interact with the water in that lake that you see in the picture. The pine trees and the other trees interact with the carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is not alive. Water is not alive. Okay? Even things like predation could be considered an abiotic component. Yes, I know it involves two living things, but the act of predation would be an abiotic. You understand what I mean, right? The act of the prey being consumed by the predator would be an abiotic component. That's going to affect how the ecosystem works. If predators eat too much of a prey, then maybe the prey who fed upon a particular grass, that grass doesn't have anybody feeding on it anymore and overpopulates everything and disrupts the ecosystem, okay? It's all connected. Now, we take all the ecosystems on Earth, all ecosystems, tropical rainforests have ecosystems. Ecosystems make up these bigger things that we call deserts, tropical rainforests, temperate forests. Temperate, what we said temperate the other day, temperate means, oh no, that wasn't mine. Temperate means seasonal. We're not real temperate here in where we live in Central Florida. We're more what they call semi-tropical, semi-tropics. Not Miami tropical, but you know. Okay, so all the biospheres together on Earth, or all the ecosystems and all those, well, between those things like the tropical rainforests and the deserts actually have another level called biomes. So actually we should probably put biomes in between. And then all the biomes make up the biosphere. Biosphere is Earth, bio, life. And that would mean the part of Earth, the sphere, that supports life to a certain depth in the ground, which is interesting because they found, was it 2 miles down? In a diamond mine in South Africa, they found a fungus living down there that doesn't live up on the surface. So life can survive pretty far underground, and then up in the air as well, how far ever you might find organisms up in the air. We most, not so much birds, which obviously, but well, birds as well as small floating particles, spores of things, and other critters. Okay? All right. Are we? Oh, good. Perfect for time. Okay, so keeping with this idea of classification, we also classify not, kind of how everything fits inside of everything, but although this is kind of that way too, but we classify critters. We classify critters based on who they're related to. Now, this wasn't started off that way. This whole chart that you see here, this whole thing I'm getting ready to talk about is known as taxonomy. Taxonomy is the science of classifying things. I actually have it in the next slide, so that'll help, okay? But taxonomy, or taxonomists, folks that are taxonomists, what they would do is, there might be too many O's in there. No, maybe not. What they would do is their job is to make these groups that you see here. Now, this is for one particular critter, the one on the far left-hand side, which is the American bear, the black bear. Is that black bear? Americanus? Before I say that, let me make sure that's the right versus Americanus. I like about Google is it gets the results. The American black bear. There we go. Mammals are real weird. They tend to hybridize a lot. And mammalogists are very notorious splitters. In taxonomy, we have the folks that are called the lumpers and the splitters. Lumpers like to put things in broad groups. Splitters they start breaking organisms down by population, so it becomes very, very detailed. Anyway, Ursus americanus, that's the scientific name. We use Latin because Latin is an unchanging language. Nobody speaks Latin other than officially with the Catholic Church, but it's not a language that evolves. Languages evolve, they change, okay? But Latin does not, so that's why we use it. The first part of that Latin name, the Ursus part, is known as the genus that you see in the chart there, and the second part is known as the species. Ursus is the genus, Americanus is the species. Now, species sounds like specific, and that's because it is. The species name is specific for a particular type of bear, the American black bear. A particular type of bear, okay, that shares similar genetic information. All right, now black bears occur all over the state. There are different populations of black bears, but again, it's that human thing. If we took all of the black bears in Florida and wherever they occur across North America, together, they're more genetically alike than they are to, say, other bears, like other bears in the same genus. So go up one step. Look, there's a polar bear there. Okay? So polar bears and black bears, polar bears live in the Arctic. Black bears live down here. They don't breed together. But all the black bears, there's that genome thing again, all the black bears there are more similar to one another. All the polar bears are more similar to one another than they are to each other. Now, is that relative? Oh, yeah. It's all relative. And that's why we have that lumpers and splitters. Okay, then we might, in the next group, in the family group we have in this particular example, if we're still sticking with bears, we start to throw in where you see the panda bear, the Ursidae. Now, that's funny because panda bears, I thought at one time were actually put with the raccoons. I think they've moved them back to the bears. Now, did the panda bear say, listen, we want to be back with the bears? No, it was taxonomists. So that's where the bias might come in. Then we go up to order, and in this particular case, in the bears, it's all those members of the order Carnivora. Now, this is not a zoology class. I am not going to ask you for what we call the taxonomy of black bears. You don't need to memorize Ursus, Ursidae, Carnivora, Mammalia. You don't need to memorize any of that. That's all important stuff, and much more detail on that in Bio 2. But at this particular point, I really want you to know how the classification scheme works in taxonomy up here. Come on, pen. Just leave my pencil. Maybe I did. Anyway, I'm talking about this stuff up here. Domain. Yeah, genus is Ursus, family is Ursidae, and then species in this case is Americanus. Taxonomy is the science of classifying organisms. It's the folks who would do this. I got that definition in the next slide too, Taylor. So, back, what I want you to know is this stuff here at the top. I want you to know what these categories are called. So we start with domains, okay, and domain is the biggest group. And domains include organisms that have similarities. Now, you're saying, wait a minute, hold on. This little fungus down here is similar to a black bear? Of course, we'd be in the same domain as well. Really? Yeah. It's more similar than a black bear is to members in another domain. You're only looking at one domain here. There are 3 of them. This particular domain is called eukarya. We'll talk about the other 2 domains here in a bit. All right, so we have domains, and domains are made of kingdoms, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. And you see how it works? Like a funnel. There's one Ursus americanus. There's many Ursus. I think polar bears are, this is kind of cool, I think polar bears are Ursus maritimus, marine, because polar bears are actually, for legal purposes, not for taxonomic purposes, but for legal purposes, are considered marine mammals, or for legal purposes, so that protection. Marine mammals are protected in the United States, so polar bears can be protected, although their environments aren't being protected. So you get the idea how this works? Does that make sense? Here's the definition for you, Taylor. So now I've done it with the gray wolf. That's Canis lupus. Now, the species name, Canis lupus or Ursus americanus, human beings, the species name always includes 2 parts. It always includes the genus and the species. All right? So this over here is a little bit misleading. It implies that Americanus is the species. Okay, but and it is, Americanus is the species, but when we talk about an animal's name, we always have to have the species and the genus. That's why it's called its binomial, 2 parts, right? Binomial nomenclature, nomenclature's name. So your species name, Homo sapiens, Canis lupus, Ursus americanus. So what I mean by you always put the words together, if somebody at a talk was, I'm going to give a talk on species lupus, it wouldn't be titled that. Like in the case here, Canis lupus. It could, people would say, there's lots of things that may have the name of species named lupus out there, really. But if you said Canis lupus, then everybody knows what you're talking about. And even if you were in a foreign language, a foreign country, and you said Canis lupus, the scientists, the zoologists, the scientists that would know what that is. They would know it's the same critter. So there's no confusion with common names, because common names like Spanish moss that grows on trees, not a moss. Not a moss at all. Ball moss that grows on trees, not a moss. By technical definition, it's not a moss. So those common names, gray wolf, black bear, can be misleading. But the species name, the binomial nomenclature, you only have one of those, right? So these 4 critters that you see in this chart that I put from the kingdom, the phylum, the class, the order, all the way down, at the very bottom is their binomial nomenclature. That's their species. Got to put 2 parts. Canis lupus, Homo sapiens, an eel, Ophictus rex is an eel, and then the last one, sometimes the common name and the scientific name, you can actually very similar, aren't they? Now, this is not Bio 2. I don't expect you to know this for the exam. What I expect you to do is be able to answer some questions if I gave you some critters like this. Like I could say, of these 4 critters, this is kind of like the old Sesame Street. This is one of these is not like the other. Of these 4, which one is least related to the other 3? Which critter is the least related to the other 3? There you go. And why did you say that, Colin or Marie? What was the clue that tipped you that they were the least related? Yep. Yeah, look at the phylum, right? Kingdom, phylum, class. It's Oh, there's some mnemonic devices. You guys, those things you memorize stuff with. Kingdom, phylum, class, class order. I can't remember the mnemonic device. King Philip came over from Greece singing. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. King Philip came over from Greece singing. Okay? Anyway, the P part, the phylum part, is different for the octopus, and that's why they said that. Because if you look at it, the other three are in a different phylum. Now, I don't care if you know what it takes to be in the phylum Chordata, as long as you know that it takes something. Just like we talked about mammals the other day. Look at that. These are two mammals. You and I and the wolf, we're mammals. We talked about what makes a mammal a mammal. The big thing that makes a mammal is the mammary glands. That's where the name comes from. But obviously, these organisms here, the one in the red and the one in the green, are more closely related than they are even to this guy. This one's a fish. And then this guy's not even in the same phylum, is it? That's what I want you to know about that. I don't really am concerned about the names. I mean, I may give you the names. There's a mnemonic device. I forgot to hit enter. King Philip came over from Greece singing. I may give you names like this, but I'm not going to ask you what is Ophictus rex or what anything like that. I'm going to say who are these are related to one another, or which groups are more closely related. Who's more closely related, a family or a class? That's a good question. Who's more closely related to one another, evolutionarily speaking, evolved more recently from one another? That's what that means. Yeah, right? Because that's a more inclusive group. Look, it's there we go. In the family, we only have Ursidae. What did I say? Class was the other one? Yeah. In class, we have the Ursidae, the bears, what is that? Leopard, the wolves, the goodness gracious, the dolphin, and the zebra. Right? See how that works? Isn't that cool? Okay. A quick little run or kind of a survey, kind of a tour of the domains out there. There are 3 domains of organisms. Now, this is interesting because this always reminds me how science changes. When I was in school, we didn't have domains. When I was in school, the domain bacteria that you see up there and the domain archaea were placed in a kingdom called Monera. In fact, when I started teaching this class, that's how I taught it. But we have found out, because of all of our technology and genetics, that things that we lump together, remember these categories, these taxonomic categories, are human made. There's no natural law thing, other than the relatedness, and that, everybody's related in some degree, like that Kevin Bacon thing, the 6 degrees of separation. Okay, so what they found out with recent genetic information is organisms in the bacteria that we had known as Kingdom Monera. There were 2 very different groups in there. Both of these organisms, domain bacteria and domain archaea, are both microscopic prokaryotes. Now, maybe you remember that word. If you don't worry. If you don't, you will. But it has to do with the type of cell they have. Both of these have the same basic type of cell, prokaryotic cells. Prokaryotic. That word is ringing a bell in your brain. You probably saw it before in your biology classes. Okay, but we found out that even though we said, well, they're small and they're both prokaryotes, so they must be related, we found out later on through genetic analysis that they actually are very different from one another. So how different? Come on, how different can they be? They look kind of the same. Well, that's deceiving. Look at the 3rd domain, the one that we're in, eukarya. Eukarya is actually come from the other type of cell, which is known as a eukaryotic type of cell. So we, you and I, those other guys in there, are known as eukaryotes. And in there are the plants and the fungi, and of course us, and then the protozoans. And that's even kind of misleading because protozoans are all kind of messed up now too. There may be several kingdoms of protozoans. But what I'm trying to say is, how much difference is there between the domain bacteria and the domain archaea? There's as much difference that we believe, looking at our data, between them 2 as there between us and them 2. So we're all equally different from one another. So domain bacteria and domain archaea, yeah, they're small. See that scale? That's 2 microns. A micron is a millionth? Yes, millionth of a meter. We'll talk about that in lab actually next week. But just because they're small and they have the same type of cells, we have found out later on that they're just as different from one another as you are from an archaea critter or from a bacteria critter. That's incredible. See, when we used to call them Kingdom Monera, we had 5 kingdoms: Kingdom Protista, Kingdom Animalia, Kingdom Fungi, Kingdom Plantae. But notice, I've gotten rid of where it says Kingdom Protists. Or was it there to begin with? I don't remember if it's in the book. But anyway, it shouldn't be there, because we believe now, and this is still being debated by taxonomists, we believe now that there are many different kinds of protozoans. That there may be as much different between protozoans as there are, say, between like the 2 monerans, the bacteria and the archaea. That just because they're small, yeah, and they swim around in a drop of pond water, doesn't mean they're the same. When Anton von Leeuwenhoek, the guy I was talking about with the microscopes, when he made his first microscope and he looked at protozoans, for one thing, he said, I can't remember the quote. I love it. I have it in my bio too. It's something like, I have never seen a more beautiful sight in my life. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, look at that. But he called these little things animalcules because he thought they were animal-like things. They weren't plants. They weren't fungus. So he kind of said, well, they're kind of animal-like. And we find out as we're going on, they're really different than any of that. Okay, so that's like more on that later. To be continued. Protozoans, to be continued. Okay, let's keep going here. Any questions so far? Remember what I said in class about online. It's a little different kind of interaction. So if you want to talk to me or you want to say something in the chat box, by all means. I mean, I'm just going to talk. Like I was saying in class, I can't look at your eyes. I can't see if you guys are getting lost or whatever the case may be. I bet you're not. This is all pretty relative, pretty straightforward stuff. But the next little bit that we're going to get into might be a little more difficult. So if you get lost along the way, please say something or type something. Okay, we're going to talk about the scientific method. It looks pretty complex here. It's not really as complex as you think, because it's really nothing more than kind of how your brain works. So I'm going to start over here, that blue line. I want to start with what we call an observation. You make an observation, and that's how your brain works. You drive down the road, the light turns red, you make an observation. Boom, there you go. Now, many times an observation may generate a question. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it does. Can I beat that red light? Or I'm sorry, yellow light. I guess I screwed up my analogy. You're driving down the road and the light turns yellow. So you say to yourself, question, can I beat the yellow light? I'm kind of in a hurry to go to work. And in this particular case, you really only have one hypothesis. Yes, you can, or no, you can't. Or maybe you throw in the third one. Yes, I can if I drive in the other lane. I'm not sure. Anyway, many times when we have a question, we have more than one hypothesis. Could it be this? Could it be this? Could it be this? Now, what's a hypothesis? Well, a hypothesis is a guess. Admittedly, I'm a scientist. Yes, it's a guess. But it is a reasonable guess. If you were standing on the beach at night and you saw a bright light off in the horizon, you can make a few hypotheses. Here's your observation. I see this bright light. What is it? Okay, it could be an incoming aircraft. You know, their landing lights, right? It could be a helicopter. It could be a star. It could be a planet. What we got? 4, 3, 4. It could be a UFO. It could be. We don't know that UFOs don't exist. Nobody's ever proven that they don't exist. And really, you never can't prove anything like that anyway. I remember as kids, they'd always have these grainy black and white photos of the UFOs. It always looked like a Frisbee in somebody's backyard, you know? And then as technology's improved and people have these bazillion megapixel phones, nobody's gotten a good shot of a UFO. Isn't that funny? You would think with all these great phones. Doesn't mean they're not there, okay? But a hypothesis would be a reasonable guess. So a UFO probably is not a reasonable guess. It'd be one of your less reasonable hypotheses. Now, hypotheses can sometimes be, once you find out, could have been pretty unreasonable. But a hypothesis says that there's a tentative answer. It's never proven, never proven. You never say, for sure, there are not UFOs. You can't do that. But what we do is we use a little bit of specific terminology. We say that hypotheses, that's the plural of it, are either supported or refuted. Either the work you did, the experiment you did, either supported the hypothesis or it refuted it. And however much it supported or refuted it, if you say, what do you mean however much? Nothing's 100%. You can never say something's 100% all the time, but however much you find out that they're supported or refuted, then you go through and you reject hypotheses based on your criteria. Okay, this hypothesis I have based on my statistical test says this can only happen 1/1,000,000th of 1% of the time. That's probably not what it is. Then it's probably not a UFO. Okay, let's go with hypothesis number 2. Let's say it's a landing lights of an aircraft. And then we would say, well, the probability could be X. And then if you're thinking, well, how would you know a star or planet? You could look at star charts. You see what I'm saying? So you're going through and you're rating these things. And if you really get a good hypothesis, if you really collect information and you think it, 99% of the time, you can start making predictions. My father used to tell me a story. I think this is an Abraham Lincoln parable. You're walking down the street and the fella is clearing some land. Next day you walk by, he's cutting some logs up into timbers. Next day you come by, he's building a structure. Next day you come by, he's putting windows in the structure. Predict he's building a house. Looks like a duck, walks like a duck, right? That's what hypotheses let you do. But hypotheses have a level of variability. They're never 100%. But the more work you do, the more experiments you do, the more information you get. You can say, wow, 99% of the time if that dude is cutting timber and doing all that, he's building a house. Get it? Right? Makes sense? So it's a reasonable guess. A reasonable guess. Excuse me. Now, what eventually happens is once you test something a bunch of times, and scientists are notorious for liking to poo-poo on each other's work. So, and that's very important because they do have to conduct experiments. Once you've done the experiment a number of times and you get the same basic results, then you can make up a theory. Theories are broader, they're more general. They have large amounts of information that support them. These hypotheses, potential hypotheses, experiments, and rejections have happened many times. You see, when you reject your hypothesis, where I put the X, you don't just quit. You go back and make other hypotheses. Right? Now, they kind of, actually, I just noticed that they sort of talked about the same thing I just did is in these next 2 steps. You go through your hypotheses and you start rejecting them. It's like if you walked into a room and your printer didn't work on your computer. Okay, well, you got the electricity to check, you got the connection, you got the drivers, you know what I mean? You got all those things to check. My dad used to say he had an engineer friend in the military that if you walked in, this guy was really smart, he said, but if you walked in a room and he flipped on the switch and the light bulb didn't come on, he would begin to take the wires out of the wall to find out where the short is. That's a potential hypothesis, right? But is it the most probable one? No, right? It's probably the bulb is out. But once you've done that enough times, once you've torn the wires out of the wall enough times and find out that wasn't it, that it was indeed the bulb, then you can say, I'm going to theorize. Now, is a theory ever proven? No. Nothing's ever proven. Theories are supported. Theories are refuted. But they have much broader appeal because the hypotheses have been done a number of times. The rotation of the Earth on its axis, in other words, day and night, is a theory, folks. But have you ever known it not to work? Right? Now, someday it might not, but 99.999, you can do the math, the time it's going to work that way. Okay, let's talk about this thing in an experiment for a second. Now, this is all very important information that has to do with that scientific method assignment. Now, I'm glad I mentioned that. One of the things I would advise you to do is wait until I'm done with, I won't finish all of this today, but wait until I'm done with this lecture on the scientific method before you start that scientific method assignment, okay? If you've already begun it, let me know and I'll clear it for you and you can do it again, unless you like the grade you got. Okay, when you do an experiment, you got to make sure that what the difference you get, if you make a hypothesis and it's supported, and then of course, with theories, as we talked about, you got to make sure it's because of what you were testing and something you didn't think about. You remember the other day in class, New York City, ice cream and rape, right? It wasn't ice cream, was it? It was the time of the year, the amount of people out wandering around. See, because if you look at that graph, and you took it face value, you would have neglected to think about what's a control. That's what we mean by control and experimental group. A control group is the same as the experimental group, but it only differs by one variable. All right, it only differs by one. So you know if there's a difference, it's got to be that. All right, let's use a really simple example. Average height of males, average height of females. Let's say United States, just to kind of give it a more distinct idea. Both of those, measure both of those average height. In general, average height of males is higher than the average height of females. Okay, but what you have to have in that particular situation is a control group. In this case, you could say that the females were the control group. If your hypothesis says, I believe that males are taller than females, and then you go out and you measure just males, and then you come back and say, well, I proved it. You didn't prove anything. Males on average are 5'8". What's the control? Go out and measure the females, they're average 5'6". Then you can support your hypothesis. Now, is it always true? No, because maybe if you measured another set of males and females, you're not going to measure every single one in the United States. You're going to sample. You might find a different answer. But if you find the same answer over and over again, then you can pretty much make a hypothesis and then theory out of that. All right, now I'm not even going to get into inductive and deductive reasoning today. It's too much for me to talk about and blow your mind away, but I do want to give you one final example with the control group. Pharmaceutical research. Let's say a particular drug being developed at a pharmaceutical company mitigates the symptoms of diabetes. Okay, and I just pulled. There's no cure for diabetes. So let's say this drug that somebody develops at a pharmaceutical company is able to do that. So what you would want to do in a pharmaceutical test like that is you'd want to have two groups of patients, two groups of diabetics, one in group A, one in B, same number, let's say 100 in each, similar background, similar ages, similar sizes. The only difference between them, right? The only difference between them, every day an orderly comes in and gives them the drug. But we know there's something called the placebo effect. Placebo effect is if you convince somebody of something mentally, they may think they're getting better when they're really not. Like, I know years ago, the big placebo thing was wearing copper bracelets to prevent you from getting seasickness. That's manure. That does not work, okay? Here's what happens. Every day when you come in the pill, you might get the placebo effect. So even though the patients in group B are really not getting the drug, they're just getting a pill, they might be getting better because they think they're getting better. The ones in group A are the ones that are getting the drug. So what you have to do is you make the B group your control. The B group gets the drug. I'm sorry. The B group gets the pill, but they don't get the drug. So they just get the pill. There's no way the pill can help mitigate the symptoms of diabetes, but over here they get the drug. B is your control. If there's any differences, significant differences, and that's going to have to be argued by you, so statistically significant differences between the two, if 1 out of 100 gets better in group B, but 53 out of 100 get better in group A, then you could pretty well say it's probably the drug in the pill. It's not placebo. Okay? All right, any questions on that? We're at time. As I said, don't start that scientific method assignment yet. Wait until we talk about this, which will continue next week. Remember to print out lab number 1. And I'm in office hours now till 12:30. So if you have any questions, by all means, you can stay in the chat room with me now, or I will be online until 12:30. You're welcome to come back anytime during that. If not, then I will see you guys on Monday. And you all have a good weekend. Is there any homework? No, or not right now. There's none to do. I don't think it's due until, what, the 12th is the first set? Yeah, remember, oh no, I'm sorry, this 26th. Remember, all your assignments are due on the day we take an exam over them. So, okay, take care, Barbara Bagia. No problem. I'm glad you asked.